Okay, this is for the Hoover Library Sci-Fi Fantasy Festival event streaming. We are recording our panel on post-COVID comics, the life of comic books after the COVID situation blows over, calms down, possibly goes away. I'm Stan Daniel, that's Albert Marsh, and with us is Sandra Swindle. We formed the Kingdom Casts podcast. That's Kingdom, C-A-S-T-S podcast. And we're just going to have an open discussion here about where we think the industry's going, if anywhere, once things get back to normal with the comic books. Now, we've talked about this at length over the podcast. And I mean, ever since, dear Lord, it's been the topic the entire year, really, about the effects of COVID, the quarantine has had on the comic books and the comic book industry. It has it's really done damage to the overall economy, but it seems to have taken a very personal toll toward the comic book industry. Albert, you want to start?
Yeah, I don't.
The major thing being DC Comics' decision to leave Diamond Comics distributors.
In that aspect, I think the short term could not have been handled worse. It's not helping anybody. I think in about 2 years' time, there's a good possibility that DC was right to do that, but that's 2 years from now. So,
yeah, I don't think that it was really the choice to be made at this time, right when the comic book industry itself is on the precipice of this situation. I mean, they could easily fall off of the edge of the cliff here. And to give a little background, Diamond Comics distributor has been up until 2 months ago, up until last week or the week before, the world's primary comic book distribution center. If you had a comic book shop, if you were buying Marvel and if you were buying Marvel or DC comic books or comic books of any such situation, then you were getting them through Diamond Comics. DC Comics, and by DC Comics, their mother company, Warner Brothers, ended that situation with Diamond Comics when Diamond Comics shut down for quarantine and stopped shipping comics earlier this year. DC Comics decided that it was in their best interest to have two large comic shops. CBCS? Nope. Wait, what was it, Sandra?
DCBS. DCBS.
I'm sorry you don't have a neon more sign to go with you there. Okay, DCBS and Midtown Comics magically has turned into distributors for DC Comics. Traditionally, new comic books get released on Wednesday. DC Comics are now being released on Tuesday when all other mass media is released, like books, novels, when artists drop albums, movies on DVDs, all of that across the board. Albert speculated earlier that that's to the overall benefit of Warner Brothers in general, because Warner Brothers is a mass entertainment conglomerate. And right now what they're having to do is they're having to prove their worth to the mother company, which is AT&T. AT&T closed the deal to buy Time Warner CNN toward the end of the year last year, and I think it took effect in February. So what we're dealing with here is in a time when the comic book industry needs to come together and stand solidified. We're looking at, like Albert said earlier, DC making a very rash, short-term, quick decision to possibly just block off part of the entire comic book industry by chipping away at Diamond Comics. We're 2 weeks into Diamond not having DC Comics. And so far as we can tell, there's not been a major difference, but we won't know until a bit later, or a bit further down the pike. What we do know is this: in relation to the quarantine, Marvel Comics has chopped a great number of their comic books, put to the wayside. They are not turning out. They had an incredible roster for an event comic called Empire, and they've taken easily more than half of the Empire books off of the list.
Yet there's still too many, because we still had, what, 4 or 5 Empire books come out this week?
Well, we had Empire Avengers, we had Empire X-Men, and we had Empire itself, and yeah, there was Empire Warlords or something.
It was something to do with Hulkling.
Yeah, I think it was Warlords
or something like that. Yeah.
There's still a whole bunch by the wayside. Marvel released a statement. One of the editors released a statement today concerning some of the X books that were coming out that weren't directly related to Hickman's X-Men, but was more of a New Warriors type feel to them, that were supposed to be released. That, yes, these books are going to come out, but no, we do not have a release date for them yet. DC Comics has also cut back what they're putting out on a weekly basis, and a large number of comics has been sent straight to digital.
Now, Marvel did that, not a large number, but they tried to send some of the last issues of their miniseries straight to digital. And I mean, they haven't announced it, but I think they discovered that they weren't going to make any money off of that. They had to print them.
Yeah, what they learned there was they took some of the lesser selling comics, some of the comics that they didn't think was going to do them any good, just to put them on the shelves, sent them to digital, and then 3 weeks after these comics were up on digital, they suddenly changed face and said, no, we're going to go ahead and print them anyway.
Well, comic books is still a physical medium, and that's how people mainly consume it. So unlike, movies and stuff like that, like if people aren't willing to buy a physical copy of a comic for $4, there's no throwing it as a digital for $4 and expecting anywhere close to that to buy it.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
now, not completely the opposite of what Marvel's doing, but along the lines of what Marvel's doing, but barking up a different tree, DC Comics has been releasing new material to digital exclusively for digital. Now, they've been doing that for a while, but typically what they would do is release it as digital and then release it into comic book format about 2 or 3 months later, or after the story finishes. But now what DC is doing is it's creating content meant only for digital, going directly to digital. DC Comics is in a little bit of more of a different situation. While it's been directly affected by the COVID virus, DC and Warner Brothers in general have been affected by the fact that they're now owned by AT&T, and AT&T is somewhere in the area of $2 billion, 200. How much is it? It's 200 billion. It's 200 billion. 200.
Oh, I don't
believe
think it's that much.
I don't
Is it
know.
that much?
150 billion.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you get that far in the debt?
Yeah,
what do you do?
150 billion in debt. AT&T is 150 billion in debt. The more pressing matter is they've got to come up with somewhere in the area of 65 billion. Now, that debt is at the end of 2019. Their current debt is going to be close to 200 billion at the moment. Yeah. And out of that, they somehow or other, and I don't understand the dynamics of exactly how all of it works, but they've got to pay off 65 billion of that in the next 5 years to stay solvent. What's happening is that openly AT&T is looking to unload Warner's gaming division, which includes, I'm going to say Street Fighter, and that's not right, is it, Albert?
No, it's Mortal Kombat.
Mortal Kombat, Injustice, what else?
The Batman, Arkham.
Batman.
Oh, yeah,
games.
the Arkham games, which is valued at somewhere in the area of around $6 billion, and they're openly shopping that on the market right now. The problem with DC Comics, the problem with Warner Brothers, is that if AT&T is willing to do that to Warner Gaming, then they're definitely willing to divide up pieces of Warner Brothers at a time and sell them off in order to maintain or in order to lower that debt. So inside Warner Brothers and inside DC Comics, you have this never-ending struggle to prove your worth to the mother company, which doesn't necessarily care whether or not you make movies or comic books that can be turned into movies, as much as they want to know where is the money coming from and how quickly will you be getting it to me. And that is what caused the knee-jerk reaction to drop Diamond Comics as the distribution center up on Diamond, announcing that it's having to close like the rest of the country did for quarantine for COVID-19.
It's just, why even bother close? Apparently none of that mattered.
Well, I mean, that's the gist of it right there. So what you've got is there's several comic books that closed their doors once the quarantine went into effect. There's several comic book stores that have closed their doors once the COVID quarantine went into effect and did not reopen. There's several more that are struggling against all odds right now, and Diamond Comics Distributors has had to take on God only knows what kind of a debt to help those comic book stores stay open. At the same time, DC Comics, one of the big two of the comic book industry, DC and Marvel, picks this moment to leave Diamond Comics.
Well, you have to remember, like, very early on in all this going down, Diamond had to call people and be like, we don't have your money.
Yeah, I think they were already having problems before.
We're not getting in our money from comic book stores, so if we don't get our money in y'all ain't got y'all's money. And
that happened within 2 weeks of Diamond having to shut for quarantine and the comics stopping shipment. That happened within 2 weeks of that, and it's not a good situation. It's not a good time to be a small business at all, let alone a small comic book shop at the moment, because how long did we go without comics? Comics come out weekly. Traditionally, they hit the stands on Wednesdays. How long did we go without them?
Was it 2 full months?
I think it was 2 months.
Yeah,
I think almost exactly 2 full months.
April, May, June. We went April, May, and June. They started at the end of June. And slowly, Marvel has just now started resuming in the last 2 weeks. No, I think it was July the 7th. Marvel started resuming July 7th, full floppy comic release. Whereas before, 1 week they would release a handful of floppies. The next week they would release trade paperbacks. So you weren't getting comic books on the shelves, or at least not new comic books from Marvel Comics on the shelves each one of those weeks. So that's an awful long time. Having owned a comic book shop, I can tell you straightforward, that's a awful long time to go without new product on the shelves.
Well, the thing is, over that 2 months, a lot of stores were shut down.
Yeah, I was about to say, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Even if they were open, what were they going to do?
Well, we say, oh, those stores were shut down, but as we now know, their rent didn't stop. I mean, there was a lot of wonderful talk about realtors. Oh, we're going to forgo rent. And none of that happened.
No, there was no rent freeze or anything.
No, there was nothing. And the utilities now, like Alabama Power, and I'm sure the other power companies, were very nice. Handled the situation well by mandating delays and situations like that. And they actually had a no cutoff rule that during the quarantine nobody would be cut off. Okay.
Some of the water companies did that too.
Yeah, that period's over now. That period's over, and where's our money for our services? But especially, I couldn't imagine going 3 months without new product, 2 months without new product on the shelf, 1 month without new product on the shelf as lifeblood of the store.
Well, there was some very creative selling being done in those 2 months, even if the stores were closed down. A great many of stores were doing mail order.
Yeah.
And they were pushing back issues. Some of them were doing like book clubs, like loot crate kind of things. So there was a lot of creativity amongst the stores that were trying desperately to get some cash flow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it was being encouraged by Diamond Comics and by Marvel Comics and by IDW Comics. Hey, look, the comic industry in itself, so far as comic books and comic book stores go, it was not in a great position. Marvel's fine. Marvel's comic book orders are set up they're going to turn a profit. If it's just $5 in profit, they're going to turn that $5 and it's going to show on the books. But Disney looks at Marvel Comics moreover as research and development for bigger projects, for the other aspects of the entertainment industry like video games, movies, TV series, Disney Plus and such.
I don't. So you say that, and I don't agree with that.
No, they point blank have said they do.
I don't.
Warner Brothers.
I think they've stripped all the stuff they want out of it, and it's just there.
But they're always going to need more. This doesn't end with that.
Yeah, but let's say what's the biggest, the newest character to pop out of Marvel was what, Miles Morales?
Yeah, we'll go with Miles Morales.
And Ms. Marvel. And Miss Marvel.
We can argue, yeah, Miles.
Money-wise, it's Miles.
Yeah.
Because Into the Spider-Verse, later this year, Miles will have his own Spider-Man game, and that wasn't Disney pushing that. That was Sony doing that by themselves.
Yeah, Sony's got a vested interest in Marvel Comics as well. And it still serves as research and development for them. They've said it before. Warner Brothers has point blank said the comic books serve as research and development for them. The Watchmen movie, when the Watchmen movie came out and before then, but they don't seem to have their act together as much as on that side as Disney does. IDW is, for a while, they were a fairly big, I wouldn't call them the third. Image is the third. Wouldn't you agree? Out of the big two, you got Marvel, DC. Then you'd say Image produces the most, right?
Yeah, Image is third out of all that.
Yeah, IDW was up there for a while. IDW had a great entrance onto the comic book market 25 years ago with 30 Days of Night and the horror template, which they grew, and they were able to get what do you call it? Property rights to things like Transformers, G.I. Joe, the entire Hasbro line, and Sonic, and ultimately Sonic the Hedgehog. But IDW, before the COVID virus hit, was in dire straits. They were having difficulty turning a profit on titles that should be evergreen properties, like Transformers and G.I. Joe. I'm not going to say Rom the Space Knight because but Transformers and G.I. Joe should always have a comic book market, and they hit a stint there where that just wasn't there for them.
Well, really, their biggest books are Ninja Turtle books.
Well, that too. That still wasn't turning as much profit as they should for them. And then they started licensing from Marvel, quick, easy Marvel stories like the Avengers and Spider-Man that would be easier for younger audiences to follow. However, IDW in and of itself does not write for younger audiences, but they are largely, what would you call them? Property renters?
Didn't they get an influx of money to set themselves up as an IP farm for movies, like from graphic novels to movies?
They did at one time.
Yeah, I think that was part of their problem with finances. Is they tried to do that, and they were not that successful with it.
And you're bringing that up. IDW's editor-in-chief, CEO, or whatever he is, he stepped down. He had been gone, he had resumed for 6 months, and he stepped down. IDW is having a big shuffling issue right now. But going forward, afterward, we've talked about this several times in the podcast. What they're going to have to do is they're going to have to go to where the money is. If Miles Morales and Peter Parker is where the money is, that's the comics that Marvel Comics is going to have to publish. If Batman, they've already overwhelmed us with tons of Joker and Harley Quinn things from DC Comics to the point that I honestly believe it is starting to saturate the market. But Batman is always going to be money for DC Comics. And so what you're going to have to do is get rid of the ancillary titles, the stuff that come out by the wayside. For instance, I believe if this giant summer crossover from Marvel, Empire, if it was still in the planning stages when quarantine had gone down and had not already had issues drawn and written and a huge plan behind it, I believe Marvel would have pushed back on it and at the very least delayed it until next year.
With the economy, the whole mess has basically resulted in a lot of comic book stores closing, and there aren't that many of them to begin with. So that's basically shrinking the market, which means that the comic producers, they just can't, there's not as many avenues for the books that they're producing, so they have to reduce the number of books that they're producing.
Yeah, and that's going to lead to not just, they're not going to go out on a limb. They're not going to give something a chance that they would have 6 months ago.
No, and they've already...
there's going to be less of a creative atmosphere and less of it's going to be less of a socio-economic experiment and much more of a straightforward economics. Iron Man sells, put him out.
At least the big two.
Yeah.
The big two are still going to be, they're going to concentrate, for Marvel, they're going to concentrate on the movie characters.
Yeah. Yeah, and IDW had a major comeback with Rob Liefeld's Snake Eyes, G.I. Joe, Snake Eyes. That first issue broke records for him across the board.
What, 60-some variant covers, didn't it?
And that last run, that new Ninja Turtles book, the last Ronin, sort of like their version of Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
That's gonna sell a ton of issues.
That's got a lot of great word of mouth.
They're really pushing that hard, so that's going to do very, very well for them too.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be things like that, things that they know that are bankable, and a great deal less. Let's pitch it and give them. You're going to see a lot less of Squirrel Girls. Limited series and ongoing series.
You'll see a lot more of them shoving Carol Danvers and everything, just like this week's issue of Empire.
I read this,
which magically made everything about her.
Did it? Hold on a second. I'm having trouble recalling it. I mean, I read it.
She's like, "Oh, you're so worthy of Ronin's hammer and all this jazz."
The main thing I walked away from Empire issue number 2 with was, it's bad to be vegetarian.
The main thing I walked away with is that it's a bad comic.
No, it is. But I mean, it's the Avengers versus plant people. Well, guess who's going to win this one, people? It's not like they're Thanos. It's not like they're Loki. It's not like they have a chance.
Oh no, the swordsman has won up the Avengers. How will they get out of this?
Yeah, and is this... That's exactly right. Is this the swordsman? I'm a little bit confused on this. The X-Men Empire tie-in was a better overall book than anything that Empire has offered so far. And that's not saying much because it wasn't that great of a book.
No, but that's the thing. I read the 3 tie-ins. The Avengers was Wakanda based.
Yeah.
Yeah, then the X-Men one really wasn't. I thought it was okay.
Yeah.
At least it was entertaining.
Yeah, it was. Well, that was it. It was entertaining, whereas the main Empire book wasn't. Okay, but this sort of discussion is exactly what's going to be going on with comic book fans across the board. Do I put my money here?
Do
I waste?
no.
Yeah. Do I waste my $5 or $6 cause, event book, $5 or $6 reading this when I could be reading something else? You're right. No, you don't. You put what's going to bring entertainment. You put that money toward what's going to bring entertainment to you. And that's something we're facing across the board. As for comic book stores themselves, yeah, kudos for what Sandra was saying earlier, the innovations that they made and pushing the back issues and all. But it'd be better to push the trade paperback than the back issues, because you don't have an indefinite supply of back issues to push. There is a finite amount of, believe it or not, Amazing Spider-Man number 300 out there. There's a finite amount of the Claremont X-Men run out there. There's even in the 90s stuff, there's a finite amount of the Namor John Byrne run out there. And you're not always going to be able to rely as heavily on the back issues as you are right now. Bottom line, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious as to, there was a lot of stuff done, like I said, with the back issues and the book reading clubs and the loot crate boxes, which were graphic novels. A lot of them were graphic novels, the trade paperbacks. But I'm curious, what I do think that the comic book store is going to have to change / evolve. So I'm curious as what they're going to do next, because they all of that creativity that they were using before was basically to survive. They were put on the spot, but now they're going to have to. They're going to have to start thinking of a plan and how they're going to change their stores to cope with what I feel is going to be the market shrinking and the industry shrinking the number of titles. Now, the only ones that I'm not sure about are Image, some of the independents like Image and Boom Studios. Image especially, because Image is not a typical publisher. The creators are the ones that are actually funding most of the costs of the books, if I understand correctly. It's not like Image is saying,
even Image has said that they're going to be careful about what they put back, and they cut their titles back.
Oh, did they say?
Yes.
Okay, so they are going to shrink. They're shrinking their titles too.
Right out of the gate, Image said we are going to reduce our output. And Marvel didn't. Image was the first to say it, if I recall correctly, and was the first out of the gate to say, no, we're going to cut back. We're going to really consider what we put out. You're right about the way the financial situation is set up. Image is also looking at the health of the overall comic book industry. Marvel is looking at the health of the overall comic book industry and the small retailers. DC Comics / AT&T is not looking at that at all.
How can you say Marvel's looking for the overall health of the small retailers when they're putting out?
Because this would have been the perfect opportunity for Marvel to go ahead and initiate a plan of distribution.
But that's not on anyone at Marvel to do that at all. Marvel would never do that. That'd be someone from Disney doing that.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
On the DC side, it was someone from AT&T being like, you need to do this and this. And DC like, okay, we'll figure something out.
It was somebody from Warner Brothers.
Or that say comics on sale Wednesday. And thought they looked good.
I don't think anybody at AT&T was even aware that it's somebody at Warner Brothers.
Somebody is, because someone told them to get on with it.
It's somebody at Warner Brothers. I don't think the buck ever got to AT&T on this. That's not saying, oh, AT&T is not to blame for any of this. AT&T is to blame for all of it.
I blame Marvel for all of it.
Conglomeration. Oh God, no. Marvel's the only reason you got a comic book industry.
Really?
Yes. Yes, it is. It's like I told you before. If DC had killed crypto, we would have been selling exclusively Marvel comics and been fine.
Yeah, there's no bias there. No bias.
Going back to comic book stores are going to have to realize that they no longer have the keys to the kingdom.
I don't think any how many comic book stores actually thought that?
Well, where else you gonna get your comics?
Man,
I mean,
it's
DC
not,
was out there is out there trying to making deals and trying to get all their bigger deals through Walmart and huge stores and different distributors. I mean,
yeah, and
at
that's
some point, small comic book stores will not be the only place in town for people to have to deal with.
no, that'd be great. It'd be a bigger share of the pie. However, what you're looking at here is you're looking at the same progression that really played into us closing Kingdom when we did in 2019. And that is that you've got an aging base here, and setting up a stand full of Spider-Man comic books or Batman comic books in the middle of Walmart and are giving them a wonderful end cap is not going to increase comic book readership that way.
I agree. I mean, there's always a contingent that says, well, get them back in the 7s, get them back in the Walmarts, but there is not shelf space. I mean, the situation that led to the direct market where newsstands were going out and the 7-Elevens were getting rid of their magazine stands, and there was basically no shelf space for comics.
Number one periodical out of grocery stores, Walmart, so on and so forth, has been the National Enquirer. It has been for God knows how long. That's no longer the case, and the National Enquirer will do good to be here in another 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
Albert, you okay there?
Yeah.
Will do good to be here in another 2 years, 3 years. So setting up Batman in the stand next to the National Enquirer and in between Cosmopolitan, that's not going to work wonders when those two titles are going down and down fast. Life magazine publishes itself only on special occasions, otherwise quarterly, and for a while did not publish at all. Life magazine is an imprint under Time and did that in order to save itself. But there was a time when it was completely unheard of that Life magazine would ever have any trouble selling off of the stands. And that's the situation we've got here. We're not cultivating a younger market. Whatever we're doing, it's not getting kids, it's not getting 14-year-olds to look at the digital imprint of the comic or pick up a comic book themselves. The way they're relating to it, if they relate to it, is through the movies and through the video games. A lot of people keep saying online, but as we're quickly learning with Marvel Comics, that's simply not the case. The money is not online for them to make putting out a single issue of whatever, Squirrel Girl. What was one of the ones that they had canceled and put strictly online?
Valkyrie.
Okay, Valkyrie, which was a good title, and hits all the notes that you would expect to bring in a decent demographic from the teenage female market.
Spider.
Yeah, it's a cultural shift, and COVID is escalating the situation.
Well, I'm going to give props. I'm going to give props to DC because they have gone full tilt and fairly successful with the young adult market, like original graphic novels and prose novels, but mostly I think original graphic novels. But I'm going to say this: those are alternate universe characters, and when Marvel does it, they're alternate universe characters. They're not. They've been changed so much to fit that young adult market that they're not going to appeal to a lot of the people that buy the 616 or the floppies.
The Harley Quinn that appears in the novels, the young adult novels, that's not the Harley Quinn running around the comic books. That's not the Harley Quinn that appeared in the Batman the Animated Series. This is a different take. This is a resaturation of her and a presentation aimed directly at this market.
Exactly.
And even that is not bringing in the big numbers.
Really? You don't think so?
It's doing okay, but it's not bringing in It's not sustainable. It's not. The numbers are showing that nothing is performing like they want it to, and I'm not talking about DC in general. I'm talking about so far as the printed stuff from Marvel goes right now. So we've been at this long enough, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Basically, what we're looking at post-COVID comics, comic books are still going to be around for a while longer yet, but they've got to find some form of evolution to bring in a newer, younger market. They simply have to across the board. The movies are great, the video games are great, but comics as a source material is still a valid and a much needed art form. And it's just a matter of finding a way to make it more marketable as we continue to go forward. We're also in a situation here where we don't know what the landscape, not just for comic book stores, but for retail in general, is going to look like this time next year. It's going to, we do know this, it's gone on long enough and it's shown no signs of abating, so we know it's going to be a drastically different landscape. So trying to forecast accurately for comic books in particular, it's an impossibility.
I mean, my God, Walmart said they're not going to open on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, they said we're not. And if you think about it, like what if they're the first,
that makes me happy.
Others, then even if they do open on Black Friday, how do they handle everything?
Yeah, predicting anything in this landscape is going to be. Look, if we could urge you to do anything, it's if you've got a comic book shop, and if you're still collecting comics, please continue to support your local comic book shop. Not one of the bigger ones, not what's the name of it? BS, whatever it is. DCBS or Midtown Comics. Find a nice local shop that retails comics and buy from them, because God knows they need your help, they need your money, and they're going to continue to. So that's the best way you can support the comic book industry at this moment. At the same token, use the money wisely. Look for what's going to entertain you, and if you're not entertained by it, you don't necessarily have to pick it up. That also sends a message to as to where they should put their creative efforts. Sandra?
But you should always put your money toward any book that has Namer the Submariner in it.
All right, and Albert? Albert, any last thought? Yeah, that's cute, Albert.
Everybody Wang Chung tonight.
All right, this is going to close out the COVID panel. I'm going to forward this, and we hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, please feel free to send them to Kingdom Comics or Kingdom Casts, CASTS @gmail.com. And we appreciate the Hoover Library letting us participate in this year's Sci-Fi Fantasy Festival. So thank you very much. Again, we're Kingdom Casts. You can download us anywhere. That's our podcast. We try to have a new one up each week, although recently it's been more like one every 10 days because there's a lot of editing to be done. All right, guys, thank you very much. Sandra, Albert, I'll holler at you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.